All right, welcome to today. So I am going to talk today, kind of an overview of their University of Missouri, and most of them have University of Missouri Extension backing. But these are our labs that we would use that would be useful for landowners. So I'm going to cover soils lab, the plant diagnostics lab, and then also our water lab. So, and all these tests aren't necessary, but it's good to know the resources are there in case you do have something that comes up. Say we do a lot of the soil testing for, well, just kind of any number of things, but a lot of our landowners with pasture use it for pasture analysis, but you could use it if you were establishing trees and give you good information about nutrients that'd be available for your trees. So we'll talk about how to go about this process. So anybody who's new, what is Women Owning Woodland? So it's a program that that I'm developing to provide learning opportunities to women landowners and woodland enthusiasts through field days, lunch and learns, and classes. We gear those towards our women forest landowners and the woodland enthusiasts. Also a Facebook page that has some networking opportunities and a place to come with questions. I use that to kind of share upcoming events that might be of interest. Upcoming events, a little sparse today, but we will have the last of the Summer Woodland Steward webinar series tomorrow night from 7 to 8:30. There's still time to register because we've recorded the past two, and we will send those to new registrants if they're interested. Tomorrow night's topic for that one is cost share for landowners. And then the WOW September Lunch and Learns registration link will be out shortly. But for September, we'll have lunch and learns on Wednesdays, still from noon to 1. We will skip the first Wednesday of September because that would be this coming Wednesday. And since we've had one lunch and learn this week, we'll resume next Wednesday with those September lunch and learns. Topics I'm looking at right now are chainsaws, invasive species, management plans, and then an outreach. She works for outreach for the National Deer Association, and she's going to join us one of those Wednesdays and discuss kind of the National Deer Association and things we can do for deer as we approach winter. So I'm going to jump right into it, and I apologize for all the words, but I didn't want to forget anything. So the soil testing laboratory, this is on main campus up in Columbia, so the soil has to actually be sent to them, but we have a process, and we're going to try a video again today. Hopefully it'll work. That'll show you how to collect the soil, and then your actual soil can be brought to any county extension office, and they'll take care of boxing it up and mailing it to the lab in Columbia, and then they'll just invoice you for that. The soil testing laboratory will analyze soil for nutrient content and fertility status. It'll provide recommendations for fertilizer and lime application, so it'll give you measurements that you should add on a per acre basis. You can also check for special soil tests for nutrient management plans or soil tests that address environmental issues. If you're a nursery grower, they'll analyze potting mixes to make sure that it is balanced nutritionally. They can also test compost, and everyone's like, why would we test compost? Well, this is important for us to check for nutrient content if we're using it as a fertilizer. Same thing for the manure analysis. And I won't go through this next slide, all of these, but this is all of the soil test procedures that they do in the lab, and all of the tests that'll give you information that is sent back to you in a much more readable form. But this is everything that gets done, which is really a lot and very valuable to most of our landowners. The results that you get, so you'll get pH, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, organic matter, neutralizable acidity, calculated cation exchange capacity, electrical conductivity, And then some special ones that if you request are available for zinc, manganese, iron, copper, sodium nitrate, ammonium, or boron. Those results will also be given. They do have usually an additional fee if you request the additional tests for those. And then they'll also give you the suggested fertilizer requirements in pounds per acre for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and then zinc and sulfur requirements. So if you've requested those tests, they'll give you the zinc and sulfur fertilizer recommendations as well. And then, so the lime and magnesium treatments are based on soil test levels and crop options. So when you take your soil sample into an extension office, they have a form that gets filled out, and it is actually going to ask you what crops you are looking at you're already growing or you could be growing. And so you could use this if you're establishing trees. Soil testing is a great idea. But also if you have trees, you know, for forest trees, this may or may not be as important because it's not always feasible for us to, you know, fertilize the forest. But if I was establishing or had an established walnut plantation or a stand of trees, I might do this. Or if I was losing trees, particularly in my yard, I might consider some soil test options to see if there's something that I'm missing that's there that is hurting it. So there's, again, just a lot of reasons we would use soil testing. Generally, this is used for, like I said, pasture improvement in some cases, your home garden, your commercial garden. They use all these soil testing results, but not completely out of the realm of usefulness for trees as well. All right, we're going to see how this one works. So this is how to take a sample. Oh, thanks, Karen, for letting me know the sound's not working yet again. So I guess I'll just attach this video yet again. This does have this great overview of the sampling procedure, so I'll use this slide as demonstration. So 8 to 12 samples is best. Sampling 0 to 6 inches of the top of the soil if you're doing a garden is recommended. If you are collecting woody, like in a wooded area, you actually want to kind of remove the top layer of like leaves and any plants, and then just get the soil material. And you want to have, when you take all these different samples, you're going to want to mix those together and then take 2 cups in for your testing. Oh. Just also a look. So if you're working with either an extension specialist, well, particularly an extension specialist, your recommendations will get sent to them and they can have access to it. You'll also get a copy. And then if you're curious about things, you can enter in your information that you're given back, and then you can actually get recommendations based off of what was already sent to you. So again, just some information that they have that is sometimes useful to landowners. Again, submitting the sample, the minimum sample size for soil is 1 cup. You want to send those samples in proper containers, such as boxes and bags specifically designed for them. So again, your extension office in your county, they will have the specific boxes that are meant to send to the soil lab. You can also pick up those sample boxes at your extension center. You do definitely want to avoid sending soil in glass jars, coffee cans, plastic bags, because all of those are prone to either opening or breaking or being punctured along the way, which can be, of course, very messy and then also contaminate if you're sending more than 1 sample. If the samples are very wet, you want to allow them to air dry for a day or 2 before mailing them. Wet samples should not be sent in sample boxes that are plastic lined, as they'll not allow soil to dry during transit. I know in my extension office, which is here in Phelps County, our secretary will take those samples and oftentimes she'll let them sit out to dry for a little bit before sending them. There is generally a slightly higher cost if you send from an extension office, because they're going to calculate in the shipping and handling. Or if you send them on your own, then of course you'll have to do the fee plus the shipping and handling. So just, again, usually it's just personal preference. You do want to copy the serial number and field sample ID from the sample information form to the soil sample that's contained. Plant Diagnostics Lab. This one is one that I use actually quite a bit. So they provide identification and solutions for plant diseases, turf grass disease, plant weed species, and then insect and mite species. So with trees, we can send in disease specimens, and they will often get back to us with what is wrong with it. So this, again, I find very useful as a forester, that plant disease diagnostics. But they do have some specifics, and this is one that it can be a little expensive to send samples in, because generally overnighting them is best so that the samples are fresh. But again, if you have trees that are dying, it's very beneficial. They also accept, which is again very interesting for people who don't have an entomology background, you can send them insect or mite species and they'll help identify those. Plus, if it is a insect or mite that is an issue, they can give you back some management recommendations or ways to eradicate them from your plant. For them submitting samples, there's it can be extensive, but there's also a lot of different things they identify. So that's always good. You want to find recently affected plant tissue that's not completely dead. So if you have something that has died completely, they probably may or may not be able, they probably won't be able to identify what killed it, because in most, they really need all those stages of the problem so they can diagnose it. Healthy or dead plant material is not always sufficient for a diagnosis, but something that's being recently affected is. You want to take samples before, so if it's something you think you can control with any type of chemical, it's best to take your sample before you apply the fungicides or any other agrochemicals, because this can make it more difficult to identify those plant pathogens. It can also, in some cases, particularly with trees, in some cases, the diagnosis for why a tree is looking bad is because of herbicide damage. And so by applying more, this might skew the results that they provide back to you. If possible, this is sometimes tricky with our tree specimens, but if you can submit the entire plant with the roots intact, dug, not pulled, if possible, wrap it so it doesn't dry out, and then kind of submit that all in a box. If it's too large, which happens a lot with tree samples in particular, we usually take a handful of root material in a separate plastic bag, and then we also take specimens from like branches and leaves and send those with it. You don't have to shake the excess soil from the roots, but in some cases, some of those pathogens will be in the soil, so it makes it a little bit easier. And then the other one is the other part of submitting a sample is taking photos of healthy and sick plants, including close-ups of symptoms. So if leaves are getting brown spots, you want to make sure you get close-ups because several different tree diseases will present themselves with like brown spots on the leaves. And if you look close, they'll have different features like rings or maybe a fungal mat that's in there. And so you want to make sure you take as good a pictures as possible. And then of healthy and sick, so they have a comparison. So, and just, this is kind of for different specific samples that they would take. So fruits or mushrooms, you want to select fruits with early symptoms of a disease, not those in the advanced stage of rot. Wipe the excess moisture and wrap it individually in a dry paper towel, and don't, so if you had like apples that you were interested, or perhaps your walnuts are getting affected by some, type of insect or a disease, you don't want to put those in a plastic bag because this can lead, lots of other things can start to grow in those conditions. So it's best to kind of wrap them in a towel and then put them in a crush-proof container with packing material to prevent movement. So like cupcake boxes are great for sending fruit because they stay pretty dry and they're fairly crush-proof with packing material. And then especially with fruits or mushrooms that you're sending their way, you want to ship those with next day or 2-day delivery. And then of note, to make sure when you ship this stuff, it's generally better to ship at the beginning of the week rather than the end of the week. So the lab is only open Monday through Friday. So if something gets shipped, 2-day delivery on a Thursday, it won't be delivered till Saturday. Or if it's shipped on next day on a Friday, it won't be there till Saturday. So you want to make sure that it doesn't have to sit in the mail for any extra time. Leaf spots. So if you are concerned about something that is perhaps eating your leaves or is a disease of your leaves, 10 to 20 leaves showing all stages of the symptoms. If they're a highly succulent leaf, so in some cases, and they do all plants, so not just trees. So if it's something that has a more succulent feel to it, it should be treated like other fleshy tissue samples. So if with this one, you wouldn't put them between the cardboard or heavy paper, but for like regular tree leaves or plant leaves, put those kind of like you're pressing them. So between cardboard and heavy paper, and then, or you can submit them still attached to a branch, and then you'll have to pack those in like either some type of cardboard box that'll hold it and send those in. Yellowing and general decline of a plant, submit the entire plant if possible. Wrap those roots, including the soil, in a plastic bag, but leave the top of the plant exposed. And then if possible, again, trying to get all that in a box can be complicated if they're fairly large. But if it's something that's, a foot or less in size, kind of sending that all in is definitely very helpful. And again, if you're going to try and look at something that is got yellowing or general decline, you want to make sure that they still have living material and it can't be a completely dead plant. Turf grass, if anyone's interested, I just included this because this is one of the things they help with. But you want to dig up 2 plugs between healthy and affected turf, And then you want those to have 2/3 symptomatic and 1/3 healthy. And this is just for them to kind of make a comparison of the two. And those plugs should be 4 inches by 4 inches and include 4 to 6 inches of soil. So a lot of times with diseases, especially in our grass conditions, it's potentially a root issue. So they would like to look at those roots as well that are in the soil. Tree wilt. So this is, again, it's really hard for us to send the entire tree, but we can collect samples from the symptomatic branches. Our goal is to get sections that are 1/2 to 1 inch in diameter, so they don't have to be great big branches, and then at least 6 inches of that branch. And then place those in those go in a plastic bag to retain moisture. And then the leaves kind of go separate, so they get pressed like we talked about with previously with leaves. They get pressed between cardboard or heavy paper, and then you can kind of put that all together in a box and send it their way. And a lot of times from these, from the branch sections, they'll culture the pieces from that branch and see what grows. And then this gives them a good idea of what perhaps disease or fungus that might be affecting that tree. Stem lesions, diebacks, cankers, and galls. You'll want to select branches with the active lesions or young galls present. Cut the branches or areas that include healthy as well as affected tissue. Dead branches and healthy unaffected branches are usually not suitable for diagnosis here. So you actually have to have the lesions or the cankers to be sent. And again, they can inspect those and cultivate if necessary. If you have a canker on a trunk or a branch that is too large for shipping, you can call them, and in some cases, just submitting pictures of the canker, they can diagnose based off of that. So, and this, usually the Plant Diagnostics Lab, because it does have a fee for any of the diagnosis, your best bet is to try and either send pictures or call me first, or an agronomist or horticulturist that's in your area, or even like an MDC forester, and try to go that way for a diagnosis first. And then we usually use this plant diagnostics lab as kind of our last resort when we can't identify something. You can also, so collecting plant and weed ID samples. So this is if you have, this is not if it's declining, but if you have a weed or a plant or a tree that you do not know what it is. And again, with this, I recommend that you try and contact, either myself or someone, a horticulture or agronomist within Extension, or an MDC forester, or other just kind of natural resource contact if you want to do ID first, and then kind of we use this again as kind of a last resort for something that we can't ID with 100% confidence. But again, for the woody plants, you have to include a leafy branch with a terminal end that has at least 5 leaves or buds. And if possible, which again, depending on the time of year, you probably can't get all of these things. But if you can include flowers or fruit that's present, thorns, seeds, or any other plant parts that are present, and then you'll want to submit an entire branch or other plant part when available. If it's an herbaceous plant, so these are not the woody stemmed ones, but these are ones that are green or soft tissue, and usually they die back completely each year in grasses. When possible, if you can dig the entire plant so that you have a representative portion of the roots. If there's rhizomes, bulbs, or tubers, try to include some of those. And if it's flowering or fruiting, you can send a portion of that as well, which again, depending on the time of year that you notice something, it doesn't necessarily always have those parts. But it is very useful to have those for testing. The other thing that the Plant Diagnostics Lab does that can be, again, useful if we can't key something out and nobody has an idea of what it is, particularly for some of our smaller insects that feed on plant material, they can be difficult to identify. So we can actually send those up to the Plant Diagnostic Lab. So again, just here's how we send them. So if it's a tiny non-flying insect, it can be submitted in a sealed plastic container. Like the Tupperware containers are great for this. Larger insects should be inside an insect vial or some type of leak-proof container filled with alcohol. So this just prevents us from having a living insect that gets free inside a shipping box. If you don't have alcohol, so it can be just normal rubbing alcohol that you have at home is usable. If you don't have alcohol, then you can freeze the sample for 24 hours prior to shipping. If it is a soft body insect, so something like a caterpillar, those should not get frozen because it can alter like the state of their body, which can hinder identification if we freeze them. And then insect pests of animals or humans will be accepted only in vials filled with alcohol. So if it's something that you've, a parasite from an animal or yourself, those do need to be dead in order for them to be submitted and accepted. You do want to make sure that you send the samples in a crush-proof container with ample packing material, peanuts or some type of other like bubble wrap material, just to make sure that it does not wet human soaked with alcohol. Oh, nope, the insect gets soaked with alcohol, not the person. So insect pests of animals or humans are only accepted in vials filled with alcohol. No humans accepted. So, and then after you've submitted your sample, they will send you a report, usually within 5 business days, that contains the what it is. So, if it's a tree disease, what tree disease it is. They'll also give management recommendations. So if there is like a pesticide that you can use to treat whatever's affecting the tree or the plant, sometimes, the recommendation, unfortunately, is just to remove that plant so it doesn't spread to any other plants or trees in the area. They'll give you the insect identification. If it's a insect that we would consider a pest to crops or ourselves, then they'll give you the information on how to eradicate it so that it's no longer affecting like your trees or your plants. So, and generally, a plant sample or a weed identification or insect identification is $15 per submission. And you can't put like 3 insects and some plants and all that in the same box. You could put it in the same box, but you have to do separate forms for all of them, and it would cost $15 per identification that they're gonna do for you. The water analysis lab. So this is the third of the labs that, again, have been pretty useful for people that I work with if we need it, or for myself to use to help landowners. But we can test water for irrigation, domestic uses, poultry or livestock suitability. Again, not always something that we use if we have woodlands, but it can be interesting if you are trying to do any pond management on your property, or perhaps run irrigation for trees. But we can use this as a homeowner as well. So they'll give us a general water quality test, and it can help with treatment needs. So if you're using well water at your home, they can kind of give you a low cost analysis of that. It also can provide information on suitability of the water for irrigation. And this also comes in handy if I have landowners that are working to, sometimes the hindrance to keeping livestock out of streams or ponds is that they don't have any other water. And so we can use this water analysis for suitability of irrigation. So in some cases we can pull water, fence out that pond or fence off that stream, but then we can irrigate using it to a watering hole for the livestock, which keeps them from causing more erosion, but also still provides water for them. They also can do suitability tests or analyses for livestock and poultry, so to make sure that it does not have anything in it that would affect either any type of animal. The only things they don't offer testing for is bacteriological, heavy metals, or pesticides. So that would have to go, water analysis for that usually goes to health department lab. And you can find those in your county health department. So what you get back from water testing is going to be pH, the total dissolved solids, electrical conductivity, hardness, bicarbonate, sodium, chloride, nitrate, sulfates, iron, manganese, copper, calcium and magnesium, and potassium. And in some cases, so if there's perhaps a lot of nitrates, for example, or sulfates in water, this can lead to things. So thinking from a pond management perspective, this can lead to overgrown water plants. And then when they all start to die at the same time, that decomposition can lead to things like fish kills. So by doing a little bit of research on the water, you can kind of help with your management long-term from a pond management perspective. We also just want to make sure that there's not such high concentrations if we were going to give this to livestock that it would have adverse reactions for them. If we're going to use it again, also for irrigation, if it has really high amounts of something that might be a hindrance to either our trees or, whatever we're irrigating, the crops we're irrigating, all this information is very useful for that. Taking a sample of water, so they need at least a quart of water, and you want to make sure you obtain that representative water sample and not have any contamination. So you want it to be a clean container. It shouldn't have contained anything previously in order to send it. Plastic bottles are best. Glass bottles can excrete boron and are sometimes, of course, more susceptible to breaking during the shipping process. The twist top, kind of like, I can't think of the brand, but they have like soup containers that are fairly cheap at Walmart that have a twist lid on them. Those are really good for sending in water samples because they usually stay closed and they're plastic and they're pretty inexpensive in order to send them. You want to make sure you use a clean bottle, rinse it twice with the water that you're sampling. So if it's a pond, for example, or water from a well, rinse it with that water and then fill on the third time. Properly label your sample, so you preferably with permanent ink, and make sure that container is tightly closed and doesn't leak. And then you can submit it directly to the lab by mailing it to the lab. Or in some extension offices, they will send the water sample off for you. And I should have said that about also with the plant diagnostics lab. So you can go to an extension office and they can also help you submit those plant or insect samples for identification. They will invoice you for it, but in some cases it's sometimes easier with that help. After, again, you should also include the sample information form with the water when you send it in. And then they're kind of the same as our plant diagnostics lab. It's usually about 5 business days before they'll send you back the results, and you'll get a form. It's usually on those forms you fill out when you submit a sample, it includes your email. And so they usually email those reports right back to you. So, and those are three labs that are available up at the on campus. I will say within the soils lab, there's a lot more specific testing that they can help you with. I just kind of hit the highlights for particularly woodland landowners or landowners that might have an interest, with gardening or things around the house. They do have very extensive testing, particularly like for greenhouses and kind of commercial gardening, commercial horticulture. As forest landowners, we don't usually need as much detail as those particular businesses, but they do provide, again, good information. And I'm going to stop sharing. If anyone, you can feel free to type in the chat box or turn on your microphone and ask away if you have questions.
What was the health department if you just wanted to test your well water?
Yeah, so health department can help with well water specifically for things like pesticides or heavy metals. We don't test for those in our lab. So, and I can also provide links to much of these resources as well. And I will say that it can be a little confusing because they call it our soil and plant testing lab. And so our soils lab has some plant testing, but the plant diagnostics lab is the best place if you have an issue. So here's the soils lab. So Nikki, all of our labs, all three of these labs are located on the University of Missouri campus in Columbia. And so all of your samples would be going to the Columbia area. So I put the first one is the soil and plant testing lab. The water testing lab is also underneath their webpage. And then here's the plant diagnostic clinic. So, and I'll say that the video is also on the soil and plant testing. It's actually on that main page that I just sent you. You can watch that video about understanding your soil test. See, no problem. See, these resources, some folks don't even know these resources exist. So it's always nice. Maybe you don't need it for your woodlands, but maybe for a garden. So now you know they're there and available. I know that it's also good information to know about. And I've used the plant diagnostics lab several times, at least for forest health issues. So sometimes a tree's dying and it doesn't show me what I can't see what's actually getting it because it's maybe a root disease or maybe it's a bacterial disease, and they can do the culture and then I definitely know what it is and we can address it that way. I'm so glad to hear that you guys enjoyed August. Hopefully September, hopefully it'll cool off a little so it'll feel more like more enjoyable to be in the woods. Like I said, we're going to talk chainsaw safety, invasive species, management plans, and deer. So that's our plan for September. And like always, if anyone has any recommendations for presentations, please feel free to shoot your topics my way and I'll work them in. See, no problem, Nikki. These are usually the highlight of my week. All right. Well, have a great rest of the afternoon. And we'll talk to you next week. Next week, we will start with our chainsaw safety, and then probably invasive species will be the week after that. Have a great week.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.